Well, welcome to Demo Jockeys. I'm Jack Cochran.
And I'm Adam DiTomaso.
We're continuing our conversation on the storytelling animal this week, and we're joined by Matt Madden, who is the host of the Path to Presales podcast. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jack, Adam, thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you.
Yeah, it's Adam. We've gone through just you and I talking through this book, and often it's good to get an additional perspective. So we thought, well, hey, let's bring in someone else who has a fantastic podcast in and of himself. Get him a copy of the book, have him read through it as well, and let's talk, the three of us, about some of these additional concepts. Before we do that, though, if you haven't picked it up, this is the book. We'll have a link in the description to the book. There's enough time for you to still read it. I definitely recommend it. We've been talking big things about the book. There it is on all three screens. If you want to get ahead of the book for next month, in December, we're going to be going through this book, Range, by David Epstein, talking about generalists in a very specialized world. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So pick that up. Again, we'll have a link in the show notes in the description. So Matt, again, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Before we dive into stuff around the storytelling animal, if I can even say it, what was the inspiration behind the Path to Presales? What was the inspiration behind your show? What kind of brought you to having your own podcast?
Yeah, being able to join Demo Jockeys for this book in particular really is special for me, and I appreciate the opportunity because hearing the story from others as I've been in pre-sales, hearing how they got started for me is one of the things that along my journey has been most exciting. And thinking about from my own path and where I started and how I felt at just kind of such a low moment prior to working within tech, knowing I wanted to transition, and the journey from there for myself, which I came to learn being what I felt was non-conventional. Oftentimes the path into pre-sales is very unconventional, if you will, I guess to use the proper form of the word. And that's what excited me about thinking, hey, I love to create content to help people tell their story, hear those stories. And it seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to help others break in and learn about this role, because for me it was very much a black box. So that's a big reason why I wanted to create kind of the focus of the show, having folks like yourself, Jack, coming in for episode 15 of Path to Presales, tell your story, and so many other great guests. So it's just been amazing, the reception from the community, and I just hope that I can encourage others through the lessons that folks like yourself and others are sharing to really be able to see their own journey in those stories and relate to that and learn tips and tricks that are going to help them really just apply best practices and break into the role and grow from there.
I would love to hear a little bit of your, the history and the idea of what was your first role? What was that? Because I like to think that we all had a magic moment, because for a lot of us, we never had Path to Presales. We didn't even know what presales when we were put into that role, what it even was, or even if it was an opportunity to get into. So I'd love to hear about what was that kind of transition moment for you, if you will, in your career.
I started my professional career out of college in inside sales roles, and then did some outside sales work as well, but not really in a tech focus. It was different verticals, oil and gas. I also worked within everything from the music business, which I actually got my degree in. So working for a music licensing firm, and then life sciences. And so there's this diverse background of different sales experience, which has helped me a lot, just kind of putting my business hat on as I learned. But I wanted to break into tech. For me, knowing at the time, going back in the time machine to around, let's say 2016, my first son was on the way, and shortly after he was born, 2017, I was like, very focused at that point. I want to become an engineer. And I thought that's how you break into tech. And it's obviously a very viable and great path to pursue. And that's where I started waking up early, staying up late, in between, before my day job, after my day job, trying to build the technical skill sets taking online courses. Thankfully we live in a golden age of that, when it comes to just great content available, but it was one of those things I was just on a warpath trying to really level up my skill sets there. And I actually applied for an inside sales role at a tech company in 2018 called Stratified. And that's where somebody, from a hero's journey perspective, just to take like a story arc, if you will, who introduced me to say, hey, it sounds like you want to put on your technical hat and you've got some strong business background. Have you heard of solutions engineering? I want you to talk to this manager instead, because I don't think that the SDR position is really aligned with where it sounds like you want to go. And that was that moment for me where I was like, okay, yeah, let's talk about that. And from there I was like, wow, man, I had never heard of that role before. And then a couple of years into it, that's when Presales Collective got going, and it's just been amazing just to kind of learn more and realize that there are some amazing thought leaders in the space as well, and having the opportunity to speak with them and learn from people that have been doing it for years has been amazing.
What was your kind of path of not learning about the role, but learning in the role? Like, were there books that you were recommended? Was there coursework that you took? Was it just training from someone? How did you get kind of up to speed when you were starting your career?
Yeah. Huge credit to my first boss within Stratified, who led the solutions team at that time. His name's Lamont Gregory, really excellent, amazing leader. I learned just a lot within the role in terms of just watching him, shadowing others, coming quickly up to speed on the product itself. But I didn't at the time actually know that there had been books written up to that point that could really help speak to best practices. Those weren't on my radar for at least a couple years later, and so it was really just trying to network, getting connected with some of the virtual coffee chats that Presales Collective got going, and starting to meet others and just kind of tune in and listen in to, I was kind of definitely more of an observer on the LinkedIn social media front, but seeing, hey, there's some people that have some really great ideas here around things I know that I could relate to from what I was starting to learn in the role, and wanted to take back and practice and just, iterate and kind of get in the reps there. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. I mean, I've always been a huge believer in being able to distill and take topics from other disciplines and think through how's that going to apply to what I'm doing professionally, whether that's in a pure sales role or now as a pre-sales professional. So having that kind of open mind and kind of learner's mindset has helped me a lot. And I think that's bringing it back to the storytelling animal. I know it's not directly a pre-sales book, but it's one of those where there's just so many nuggets there that, as you guys have discussed already up to this point, and as we'll talk about today, that are easy to bridge the gap and think through, see how it's going to add value moving forward for, my day to day, and hopefully everybody that's listening.
That's great. I mean, that's part of the reason why we do this. It's weird how little resources people are aware that are out there.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm like, well, I wanted to start the show and let people know about it so that they see here's one more resource, but there's so many more. As I've listened to your show, that's been an interesting thing that I've always taken away from it, which is how people not just found out about it, which is always interesting because it's someone saying you should do it. And usually it's that hero's journey of resisting. I don't want to do sales. Like, it's normally the first piece. But then once they're in role, how they get educated on what to do, how they learn, and I feel like now we're in such a better place than we were, 5-6 years ago, even around resources that are available and out there to get. If you're new to the space, there's no reason why you can't kind of hit the ground running with getting better at the craft and learning from others right away. Yeah,
absolutely. And, Jack, I loved you coming to tell your story. I would encourage others to go check that out, just kind of how you broke into the role and how you've grown as a leader there. And I know we talked about, just kind of interesting takeaways in books in general during that episode. Adam, I was curious kind of to take your question to me, that you turned to me just around what was that pivotal moment, if you don't mind. I'd really love to hear that part of your origin story, not, just if you wouldn't mind speaking to that for me briefly, like that moment you talked about. What was that for you?
Oh, I love telling stories. Jack knows this. Yes, I will happily tell you that.
Sorry, Jack, forgive me.
Here we go.
If this is going off the rails.
I mean, we may have a
Going
much
off the
longer
rails.
episode today. It's just what this is coming down to.
Absolutely. Okay. I need a drink of water. So, as I splash it's a funny story. You said something earlier. My wife, children, families growing, situations changing. I got to kind of kick my career in overdrive. Mm-hmm. And I was in a very similar situation. My newly wedded wife was pregnant, and our family was growing. We were 28 years old. Life was changing big time for me. So, with all of that being said, I was in tech support, and I was pretty good at it. And I enjoyed tech support. I enjoyed talking to clients, and I got to talk to people all day and help solve their problems. That was a lot of fun for me. My career always had been in tech support. I started working at a company called Stream. I did tech support for anything from cameras to Microsoft SQL Server, to really date myself, NT4O. And long story short, I was working for a startup in marketing and web analytics called Sane Solutions. And a sales manager heard me talking on the phone to a client and like, hey, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Oh, this feature does this. You should get this. And then they added that onto their contract. And then I got pulled into the CEO's office sweating, thinking I was fired. And I got a 10 grand raise. And this is way back in 2002. I got a big raise, and I got a promotion, and I got put into the sales floor. And then they said, figure out how to demo. And I gave the most boring feature function demos on the planet that are the worst ever. But that was how I got into pre-sales.
Very cool. Well, thank you for quickly taking me on that journey. Jack, sorry to throw it out there, but man, that's why I love it.
It's like we're doing a Path to Pre-Sales episode in the middle of a Demo Jockeys episode right now, which is I'm fine with.
Oh, why not?
Boom.
If you want to see more of Matt doing that level of quality interviewing, please do check out his podcast. Not a tongue in cheek. Please do check it out. I've enjoyed listening to it. It's a great resource that's out there. So, yeah, I don't mind you sharing a little bit about how your show goes in the middle of ours. That's perfect. But let's actually get to talking a little bit about the storytelling animal. So, Matt, we had spent the past few episodes talking through things like mirroring, looking for meaningful patterns, and both of those have made a real difference, I know, in how I think about and how I go about telling stories within my day-to-day already. I know Adam has talked about doing the same. It's really been making an influence in the way we approach our storytelling. Mm-hmm. Has there been something, as you've gone through the book, maybe it was one of those, maybe it was something else that you found has kind of influenced how you think about telling stories? Yeah,
definitely. So one thing I wanted to touch on is just when we're thinking through, towards the end of the book, they really get into the future of story. And it's something that's been on my mind a lot as I think about where things are heading from. And this has been the trend, but continues to be the trend. And there's a lot of great resources talking about how to align to buyers' preferences in the sales motion. And like, how do I, when I think about the demo narratives that I might be helping create talk tracks, even automated demos using, a tool for that, like one we have at my current organization. And, as listeners out there, I'm sure could think of, a handful off the top of their head, but you're thinking about that. What's going to be compelling? You've got, attention span is more limited than ever. And we know we want to empower buyers. So when we think about what is the story in the medium on which we're telling that story, that is going to be most effective, and sticking with that as it evolves. There's something that I could just relate to, because they draw in the book the reference to how, there are people that say the written word is dead, as like a strong medium, and it's shifting just completely to to video or gaming, talking about how gaming is such a dominant industry compared to like the written word and so on. But I mean, even as those evolutions take place, I mean, that underlying structure that they call out of, just kind of the age old, story structure and how effective that is regardless of medium, is just so key to keep in mind. So that really stood out to me, just thinking about, regardless of, whether it's a new demo automation platform or, maybe it's a VR demo experience that we're all shifting to as an industry trend, keeping in mind the underlying constructs of story that make it really powerful, like you guys have talked about up to this point, I think is really huge.
That's kind of interesting. So when you think about a story and like, how would you, taking that idea of a story and putting it a little bit more of a mechanical focus around it and saying, adapting that to a demo flow in the sense that we have to deliver this message, we have to wrap a story around it. Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics of that, or just how you would think about like including that story in execution?
Yeah. Well, one of the points you made, Jack, on a recent episode I thought was so great was making sure that the story, I loved how you guys kind of went back and forth around making sure it's not just this, hey, there was a problem and then there was a happy ending, but like actually leaning into the messy middle. And that's one of those things, like a great book that I read a few years back, but as I was going through this and preparing for the show, I thought about is Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull. And he, former CEO of Pixar. And he talks a lot about this process of like when they start going through hashing out a story, and there's this messy middle, but how they lean into like parts of that like how that's so key and integral, and it really makes the story authentic and comes to life, and for the person hearing the story. So I think part of that is just understanding. For me, when I think about going through the demo, ideally having some decent discovery done up to this point, things that we can plan on and align our story to in terms of questions we might ask along the way as we think about how we're going to step through what we're showing, and only aligning the order of what we're showing to what we know to be most relevant, and all of these things that can really help just give us good signals on this is the best place to maybe lean into a story, and also being mindful of if we've learned they had a challenge with a prior vendor, and it was really rough, and being mindful of the fact that they've fall into, I guess, the category I've heard Peter Cohen categorize it as a burn victim. Like they're a burn victim. Like you need to be mindful of that in the story you're telling. And don't just paint a totally rosy picture here, because the reality is, I mean, we've had implementations that we've learned from, and I'm sure most vendors have. And you guys have spoke to that from your experience, and just kind of, leaning into that in all of those considerations. So that's a lot there, but hopefully that speaks to some of the things I'm thinking about as I've gone through this book and listened to your all's episodes.
Yeah, I like that angle at thinking about it, because we never really considered, when we were talking about it, as much of what's the current situation. Because I think about even most of the quote unquote pre-built customer stories, the slides that are ready to go that you can regurgitate. Most of those take into account an assumption of the current state of the customer being, there's a problem, but it's not, they're not the burn victim, right? They may not have gone completely off the rails. They may have a problem where their hair is completely on fire, and that's the one problem. And we need to be able to adapt and change our story to fit that, kind of like what you were talking about before, what was brought up by the end of the book. Everything that we do, whether or not it is a storytelling, can take these storytelling elements into it around kind of giving a narrative from start to finish. And that narrative might be starting with a completely broken issue and not even starting. We don't want to make the problem seem too rosy in our story. Right. If that's not going to be something they're going to relate to. Definitely.
And I mean, I've been in a scenario, and I'm sure you guys have too. I mean, can you think to a time where you come in even knowing some decent information from what's been learned thus far in speaking to that potential new client? You come in, you're like, this story is going to be very well aligned. You've got a plan, and it's the whole I guess Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face or something, something to that effect. And
something
so it's like,
that, yeah.
what are your stories on deck, or being mindful that we might have to adapt? Like, maybe I shouldn't tell that story anymore. So,
or the wrong person's in the room, and that story could actually go over flatly, if you will.
right.
Which actually kind of brings me to another question, and this is interesting. It's a little bit off topic to a degree, but it is on topic related to pre-sales. I'd like to point out, just interesting, like that all three of us are fairly creative people. Matt, you've mentioned that you have a history of music. I have a history of music. Jack, you have a degree in acting. We all have this level of entertainer value. Do you feel that that's helped you in your pre-sales career? And the reason why I asked that question is because as I read this book, and find myself becoming a better storyteller because I've read this book, I still go back to my roots of what I did in the industry I was in before I was in this sales industry, before I was in tech sales and pre-sales. And I still use some of those tools. Do you feel that creative people have an edge, or do you feel that kind of helps you in general with your activities and what you would want to train people in from a pre-sales perspective? Kind of a multi-layered question, but I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you went that direction with the question. I personally do feel like it's helped me a lot, just from being comfortable, whether it's in person or virtual, where effectively you're taking a role, being center stage in the conversation, in that meeting often. And it's something that, I think if you are used to that, whether it's from performing on stage, musically, it could be a music theater capacity, it could be in a live music capacity from like an instrumentalist. But certainly that, years of experience there. I mean, I started college as a guitar major, and then I pivoted when I was like, holy crap, my friends that are business majors are probably going to make a lot more coming out of this, and they have more time to play guitar. They were music business majors versus a pure guitar major. And I was like, man, I signed up for the wrong thing. So I switched there, but I still play it. I loved it. And I mean, there are parts of me, of course, in hindsight, I'm like, man, I wish I would have stayed in, because I know my guitar chops would be just, that much further along. But, which is kind of a nice thing from the Wobegon effect, because that we can talk about later. But yeah, I do think it's strong. But if you don't have that background, like the book, I think calls out, it really highlights the fact that we're all probably a lot more creative than we give ourselves credit for. Like, our mind is just naturally doing that when we're sleeping, when we're daydreaming, and it speaks to all of that really deeply. And I thought that was an interesting takeaway, because there's probably a lot of, if you're out there like, I don't have a musical bone in my body, or I don't have an acting background, and like, maybe pre-sales isn't for me. I would say, well, don't pump the brakes just yet,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
You can learn creativity, right? I mean,
right.
There is some innate creativity that a lot of people have, but you can learn to take wherever you're at and become more creative. And so it's a skill that no matter what base part you start with, that you can grow. And I think stuff like reading books like we just read here, or honestly go sit in on there are improv classes. Go pick up an instrument. You're never too old to try. I think you'd be surprised at how much that can really drive your own professional development. Like, just try to be more creative. See what happens. No one's gonna punish you for trying to be more creative in your life.
Right.
As you've thought about your role, and you've thought about the creativity that you've brought to a role, are there times that has you felt it's not beneficial? I don't know if there's a yay or nay answer, but has there been a time when you felt like being creative here is not something I want to do?
Yeah, I think for me, I found it to be an area where sometimes, and this could be the mentality of somebody who's coming from, a practice-driven background, whether it's from, studying music or art, or acting, is the discipline of that, taking my perfectionism hat off and being okay with, trying to be maybe less creative, maybe not tweaking this or that as often as I might feel like inclined to do, and just say, this is already pretty good. This is really good or where it needs to be. And I have these other things that I'm also bouncing on the priority list. So when it comes to shifting gears and doing that, that's something that I've had to be really mindful of, is my tendency to, I think, try to be a perfectionist. And, I've had some great managers along the way that I've seen, hey, like Matt, you're a great writer. You lean in from a creativity standpoint. But I want to make sure that, we don't spend as too much time trying to get it absolutely perfect, because your good is maybe if you're not just higher than others when it comes to that. So just be aware of that. And I'm not trying to. That sounds like I've got my ego like way up here, and I didn't mean for that to sound that way. But
no, I'm not.
That's my struggle.
It's calling to the attention to the fact that as you focus on your creativity, it can be something that can bog you down, and
right.
you don't get work done because you feel like everything I do now has to be out of a creative lens.
Exactly.
So that's definitely something worth keeping in check. I love it.
It's funny. I just like to close on one quick thought, though, that this whole conversation reminded me a line from the book. A life story is not, however, an objective account. A life story is a carefully shaped narrative that is replete with strategic forgetting and skillfully spun meanings, just like a demo.
Yeah, just like a demo. Indeed. It's not, you're not going to get everything, but you got to get a little, and you have to figure out that editing piece. You're not showing the end to end. Yeah. So we are about out of time for this episode, but worry not, listeners. If you're binging this, Matt is going to be on for the next episode. We'll continue the conversation right where we've left off. But meanwhile, Adam, if someone wants to know where to check this out, where should they go?
Oh, they should go to YouTube or any place where they can get their favorite podcast. And YouTube, if you want to see our handsome smiling faces and what crazy t-shirt I'm wearing this week.
It's a good one.
It's definitely a good one. It is. Also, check out demojockeys.com. You can find links to the books we've read, the books that are coming up, as well as listen to the episodes right there as well. That's going to do it for us today. We'll see everyone in the next episode. Thank you, Matt, for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode there too.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.